So thanks for having me as always. I gotta do this. There is a little bit of Dark Triad in here, so don't get confused why I'm studying intrasexual competition. But as I did the last time I was here, I try to give some context for this for these projects. So this project was supposed to not be my project. I was just helping people out, said, oh, I'll help and collect some data. And this was back when I was in Australia. It must have been 2013 or something. And the data got passed around quite a bit. And eventually I just got so frustrated with the lack of movement on this data that I just took it back. And I said, okay, fine, I'm going to do it. No one else seems to want to do it. And it's been an interesting ride because with all these 16 collaborators, they spent almost a decade ignoring this data. And then when I started making articles, no, wait a minute, we want to be on this paper, we want to be on this paper. So it was this mad rush at the end to get these people on and to integrate them, and it's such a disaster. It's one of my least favorite collaborative experiences because it started out that it should have been very positive, that everyone had a kind of defined roles, but it just dropped out very quickly. And we've already published one paper with this data, and we have another one under review. I think this is the other one under review now that I think about it. And it's because the collaboration was among personality psychologists and evolutionary psychologists. So we included this scale on intrasexual competition. And ultimately, we're just kicking around the data. I was just bored and I found something quite interesting in this data. And so it's mildly exploratory, but I think it's fairly convincing as well. So this is collaborators from the Netherlands, Canada, all over the place. And hopefully it will be received well at the journal. Okay, so I want to back up a little bit and talk a little bit about philosophy instead of talking about psychology, because philosophers have been obsessed with the idea of human nature, right? Are human beings, what's the word? Are they naturally evil? Are they naturally violent, peaceful? Are they aggressive? Are we warlike by our nature? That type of thing. And so we have really two opposing kind of viewpoints here. The first one is Rousseau, and his argument is that we are natively nice. We are nice. We're nice at heart, right? That society corrupts us and all this type of stuff, and that it bothers me because I'm just not enough of a hippie. And it seems to me that Rousseauian philosophy is really just 1970s hippie America, where it's peace and love, and everyone is kumbaya and holding each other's, and that when you're violent, it's somehow this corruption of human nature, that there's something wrong with you, like you have someone who is aggressive by nature. Oh, that's because they have some dysfunction or because some Freudian inferiority complex or something like that. So I'm not a big fan of this, and I've had in other places criticized kind of Rousseauian thinking as really dominating social psychological thinking as a rule, that anything that is considered undesirable, aggressive, like psychopathy or selfishness is somehow an aberration as opposed to just part of the natural variation in human behavior. Hobbes, on the other hand, has a completely alternative viewpoint to Rousseau. And there's, of course, gradations in the middle, philosophically speaking, but Hobbes is essentially the Leviathan, that the world is crap, right? That you're going to die. And this is a fairly accurate representation of reality for most animals in the world. Their life is cold and wet and hungry and scary. And that's how, especially prey species. I mean, I have my dog here for the people who can't see on the screen. His life is not that, right? He has a very nice life, but there are dogs running around the streets, I suspect, of Katowice that live a dangerous life, that might die, that have, broken legs and all this. And human beings have, from my perspective on the Rousseauian kind of point, is that we've had a lost touch with that nature a little bit in this Rousseauian perspective. We've forgotten that life is dangerous, life is unpredictable. Indeed, I would argue that the fundamental thing that COVID did is it reminded people how dangerous and how unpredictable life was. And then the panic that ensued was, oh my God, I forgot that I didn't even realize life was bad. And so the panic is this realization that, oh, things can fall apart in the world. Okay, anyways, so, but most people don't like a Hobbesian view. It seems bleak, it seems sad, it seems pessimistic and all these other negative words. I'm more on the Hobbesian side of the spectrum for sure, but I don't think that either of these people had it right. I think when you bring in an evolutionary approach to aggression, to violence, to selfishness, it puts it in its context. You can say that this socially undesirable behavior is we don't have to like it as a society, we don't have to like it as people, but it can be adaptively beneficial. So it can be naturally occurring and potentially rational. And I don't mean rational in the classic economic sense of rational. I mean rational as it makes rational sense that you would do this thing, that I would act jealous because I see threats in the world about my girlfriend hanging around with lots of attractive men or something like that. So from this perspective, you might then ask alternative questions like, what if we're both of these things? So the problem in some ways with the Rousseauian Hobbesian argument is it's a false dichotomy. It almost assumes that you can't be both, that in some circumstances, it might not be good to be kind, and in other circumstances, it might even be bad to be kind, just as the same thing with being competitive. You might then ask the question, then, is competition not a social pathology, right? Is this not something we should minimize? I was just at a conference in Stockholm, and one of the commentators in the room was so clearly he saw anything to do with social inequality or competition or anything like that as a social pathology. We should eliminate that, right? We should make everyone equal. And I'm in the back like, why? Why is that a good thing? Why should we want that? It seems rational then to compete in some circumstances, to compete for better jobs, to compete for better mates, to compete for better food. That type of thing. And then these are adaptive goals, not social goals. What if life, not just now, but forever, has been full of competition between men and women, between boys and girls, between boys and boys, et cetera, et cetera? That if this is not only a naturally occurring condition, but it's so common that it has shaped our psychologies, that we live in a world of competition. We're competing with I'm competing with other men to get the attention of women, for example. This is not a unique Western phenomenon, right? Chimpanzees compete with other chimpanzees. Lions compete with lions. These are naturally occurring processes, and if they're occurring across species, then how can we link the intrasexual competition or the competitive instincts of people across species, as opposed to just say focusing only on human beings? Right? What are the human-specific strategies? Those are interesting, but underneath them, if we buy the argument that competition is a general phenomenon in the animal kingdom, then something deeper than just strategies has to link them, and that's what we're hoping to get at here. So whether it's chimps or lions or rams, what are the systems then that would have evolved to help organisms solve this problem? When females are competing with females, what would be the systems that might have evolved? Okay, so I think what would help is if we back up and say, well, what is competition in the first place? It's easy to get caught up with competition in the modern way of thinking about it, a football game or these types of things, or Wing Chun or something like that, right? Like these surface level kinds of competition that don't get at the heart of competition. So let's imagine all the competition in the world, and we run some sort of factor analysis and say, well, what are the actual themes? What's going on behind the scenes? And I think it comes down to things like, you have something I want, for example. You're in the way of something I want. You took something I want. And I want to assert my dominance over you. And lastly, I want to impress others. Now, is this a complete list? No, by any means. This was my ad hoc list that I created for this talk. But it seems like it's these cut through sports and competitions at workplace, and that's what I would like to do with this project, is say let's get to the heart of the matter of intrasexual competition, and that's what we'll go to next. Okay, so one of the problems with competition, though, is that maybe not as much now, but definitely in the Victorian time, there was this very romanticized view of the animal kingdom. And so people didn't like the idea that life was dangerous. So there was this idea of, lions laid down with lambs. Now, this is not impossible. I've seen videos of baboons, leopards playing with baby baboons, right? This is an aberration, though, right? There's something maybe wrong with the leopard, something like that. As a rule, this doesn't happen, right? The lion, you can believe the lion is not going to kill you. This is very postmodern, right? But it's still going to kill you, right? You can believe it's a bunny, but it's still a lion, and maybe you get lucky, but it doesn't prove that it's. See, it was my mind. It's like the joke I like to make about postmodernists is like they watched The Matrix and they thought it was true, right? If you just believe something enough, right? I can change the world with my mind. It's very silly. So one of the things that's held us back in studying kind of the heart of a lot of things about competition is, I think, this residual of this romantic view of animals. So we have to think, okay, these animals are trying to survive. They need to steal, right? There's a biology fact, right, that animals steal energy from other animals, right? So the lion steals energy from the lamb here, for example. The lamb steals energy from grass. Grass steals energy from the sun, et cetera, et cetera. So these aren't pretty pictures. Intrasexual competition is everywhere. One of the interesting things about biology, or knowing a bit about biology, is you can ask the question, why the hell does a giraffe have such a long neck, right? The common explanation was that it would help them reach, right? Help them reach the leaves up higher, right? And it's not Lamarckianism, as in like I stretched my neck and then it was like those giraffes that had longer necks had more food, had more babies, and it was a directional selection. But evidence suggests in the contrary is that it might be about competing with other male giraffes. These are two male giraffes. And so some scientists would say that the evolution of these long necks actually enabled male giraffes to fight with one another. And this is how they fight. Yeah, I don't know how long. I don't know how long this is going to keep going, but nevertheless, this is brutal, and you can imagine broken necks. And what's amazing is they have no more vertebra than, like, say, a horse. The vertebra has just gotten longer. It's like this is instead of sexual selection for like a female's choosing, this seems to be more actual direct selection for aggression within the sex. Now, I'm not going to leave out females in this, of course. And if you know anything about Japanese snow monkeys, the dominant females are horrible. Like, they are just not nice at all. Like, they're in cold, cold Japan. And if you're not cool, basically, this is like high school. It's like high school girl behavior. Like, if you're not cool, you're not allowed in the hot spring. You have to stay out in the cold snow and freeze. And maybe you accidentally got dropped in the water, so now you're drenched and they kick you out nevertheless. It is horrible treatment, but we somehow don't want to deal with this kind of reality about biology. So I'll give you a story from back in Australia. So I had a student who wanted to study female intrasexual competition. And when she went to present her kind of proposal, the people in the room really didn't like it. They were like, oh, this is just mean girl stereotypes. Like it was like this, they were operating under this delusion that women were just on each other's teams all the time. I'm not saying women can't be friends with other women or anything like that. It's that women compete with other women and sometimes they treat each other really badly. So for example, the idea of the sexual double standard, which I suspect everybody is aware of, seems to be a female-specific phenomena, that it's women imposing these sexual standards, these sexual rules on other women. So a study that showed that in different sororities, and so at every university that they have sororities are implicitly ranked, right? There's no formal rules, right? But everybody knows that, Kappa Kappa Gamma is the top and Pi Beta Phi is the bottom. And the females at the top are more likely to engage in slut shaming, like downwards, than the other way around. as in these dominant females are keeping these women down. Oh, she did this. The same behavior I imagine here is not punished as it is. So the horizontal punishment doesn't exist. It's this vertical, stay in your place, stay down, which is ultimately, from my view, from a biologist view, this is what's happening here, right? That these are females treating other females who aren't cool enough, essentially, horribly. And yeah, they're cute nonetheless, but they're horrible. Okay. Now, of course, intrasexual competition happens in people as well, and it's all over the place. Right, it's in the workplace, it's in universities, it's for grants, it's for finding romantic partners, it's for everything. I mean, it's even to the, like, it can be so minor as in when I go out and I see a guy in a nice suit, I hate him a little bit, right? It's like, oh, I like that suit, that's a good suit, like, I hate that guy. Or I see a really good looking guy, oh, I hate him, right? I don't actually hate him, I'm making a joke, right? But it's like this, like, I'm envious of what he has, so to speak. Yeah, and in the case of case in women, things like social ostracism, the shame that goes on at high schools a lot for young teenage girls, online harassment as well about the right dressing the right way, having the right makeup. It's even in The Simpsons. So in the Simpsons episode, there's a random little girl who comes in, played by Lisa Kudrow from France. And Lisa Kudrow's character is all sophisticated. So she wears makeup and all that. And like, so, and now Lisa Simpson is a bit like, she's torn on this because she feels like she needs to compete. So she starts wearing makeup too. And so it becomes this, as a biologist, we call it runaway selection. So now everybody starts doing this. So we see this in, I think, a lot of the body modification that's taken over in the last 10 years with lip implants and all the, it's like, one person does it, so then I need to do it to keep up, and it just becomes this barrel, like rolling down the hill out of control. So we are no different. We are not special. We engage in intrasexual competition as well. But as I mentioned, I think it's something deeper that's more likely to link us together than strategy. So what strategies do I mean? Well, there was a recent attempt to factor analyze the scale that we'll use in this study. And what they seem to come up with is there might be two factors here. And what they called them were superiority enjoyment and inferiority frustration. Now, I have some statistical problems with this, and I have some conceptual problems, but mostly these seem like strategies. And they don't seem to inform much on kind of the evolved architecture of intrasexual competition. Now, why do I think this is even more amazing is that the people who did this all consider themselves evolutionary psychologists. So they somehow found themselves thinking like Freudians when they're all evolutionary psychologists, which was very confusing. So why is it tortured? They had to do a lot of modifications, for example, to the factor structure. And I'm just, it's like, how can I say? There's this sense that they really struggled to come up with good words for the labels, good labels for the grouping, for the factor. So we're going to try to see if we can do better than they did, but also we'll compare to their solution, because this is very new, their solution. So I would say instead what underlies personality, or all the things that we often study, attitudes, are things like emotional systems, motivational systems, cognitive systems. These are biases in our brains, if you will, that generate the external behavior, that generate intrasexual competition, that generate mate finding behavior, whatever you want to, all these types of things. And so I think it's more likely that it's emotion. Now, why do I say there's three? I don't have any prediction that there's three. It just turns out that in our study we found three. There may be other ones as well. We really think that I really think this two-factor solution is wrong. And instead what you have are three systems, at least within this particular scale that we'll get to in a minute. The first one we'll just call jealousy, intrasexual jealousy, as in I want to protect what I have. That's really what jealousy is about. So it's, I have earned some status at 44 years old, and I don't want you to take it from me. And so I'm going to protect it. Would be, well, I haven't earned this status. Now I want what you have. You have that. When I see that guy in a nice suit, I'm experiencing intrasexual envy, right? I wish I had like what is this guy, Dwayne Johnson, right? The life this guy lives, amazing life. I am envious of that life. I'm sure he's not envious of anyone, right? He has his private jets. I mean, his life is amazing. So he might be more likely to experience intrasexual jealousy when threatened, as in, I want to protect what I have. Right? And lastly, that worked. A feeling of entitlement, of superiority, like I should have this. I want this thing. I'm better than you. I deserve this. And if you don't feel like you deserve it, why would you pursue it in the first place? If I don't feel like I deserve to be the #1, professor of Dark Triad research, then whatever, it doesn't matter. So you have to also care about this particular thing. So partly that's because being intrasexually competitive is risky, and so you have to be willing to take the chance to engage in this behavior. Okay, now this is a pet peeve of mine, so I want to get to this. This is a horrible picture, so I'm sorry, but people constantly get jealousy and envy wrong. Someone says to me, "Oh, like I keep using Suits as an example, but somebody sees me traveling. Oh, Pedro traveling all over Europe. Oh, I'm so jealous of him." No. You're not jealous of him. You're envious of him. So I'm a bit of a jerk. And so when people say this to me, I'll say, don't be envious, right? I don't actually correct them. I just sideways correct them. But to be jealous over Pedro would be like he's giving attention to someone else, right? Like I would be jealous now because Pedro's giving you attention. I'm not jealous now because I own him. So it's like, right? But people constantly get these wrong, and it's a pet peeve of mine. So one of the things that's I think important here is that there's a conflict in the research about whether there are sex differences in intrasexual competition. Within fields, there's disagreement. So in biology, there is clear evidence that there is intrasexual competition. Gorillas fight with other gorilla to maintain their harem, to protect it, and all that type of stuff. But when you do survey research, and I don't know why I say survey research on people, we don't do survey research on dogs, but it's like one of these extra bits of words that we need to strip out in our writing, like survey research is only on people, so only on, there's really scant evidence on it. And when it exists, it is elusive, it doesn't replicate, and it makes it seem like there isn't intrasexual competition, like sex differences in intrasexual competition in people. It's very clear that there are these differences in behavior, in biology, right? Where we have rams smashing together. It's only the male rams that are smashing together, right? Female rams are not doing the smashing. Female chimpanzees aren't likely to do this kind of stuff, to beat their chest and beat the drum, beat the trees and all that type of stuff. So it might be that there's something hidden going on here. In biology, the focus is on contest competition. It's overt behavior, right? I'm competing with you. I can observe this behavior as a researcher externally. But in people, we have very weird data. So mostly Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic data. It's when they do find sex differences, it's super specific. It's like gossiping, for example. It's slut shaming. It's not global intrasexual. It's not a generalized disposition. It's a particular phenomenon. And so something I learned very long time ago from David Buss was that one of the problems we have in psychology is that we get fixated on a phenomenon, and a phenomenon would be like slut shaming, like gossip, as opposed to trying to look at the broader, bigger picture of, well, how do these two phenomena fit into a larger framework? And so I think by focusing on small things, we can miss the forest in this case. So we would suggest that the factor analytic, the tendency to treat the data as an intrasexual competition as a one thing, a unidimensional thing, the reliance on weird data, and the focus on this uber specific actually might be hiding the fact that there are dispositional differences in the kinds of things that people engage in. Here, just for example, if men, this is just being a prediction, right? If men have more status, as we are told all the time, then they should be more likely to try to protect it. They should be more likely to have intrasexual jealousy because they have status that they want to maintain and protect. In contrast, as we're told, women have less status. They should have more intrasexual envy, as in, this woman has a bigger purse than me, therefore I want that purse, right? And I think maybe not now, but women definitely used to compete on purse size. Like, the bigger the purse, the cooler the woman. No, yeah. Now we're going small. Like, this is how it works, right? So people with high status try to differentiate themselves. So so watches got really big, and then they get small. Like, it's the same thing. We're all trying to differentiate. Okay, so some effects we might talk about, we might predict. We would think then older people should have, in principle, they have more because they're older, right? And so they should be more intrasexually jealous. They should be trying to protect what they have, right? So the 50-year-old has earned, in principle, right? And then don't take that away from me. Don't take my house or whatever it is. Obviously, we're going to try to see how these might be moderated by sex, but you would expect it to be older men in particular. And it'd be something like me sitting at a conference with my gray hair, poo-pooing something some new guy said in a conference, right? Oh, you're wrong. That's not true. You can't do that. This kind of thing, because I'm trying to maintain my power, my fiefdom. My control over this field. And so someone's presenting something on the Dark Triad. Actually, I think that's literally what was happening here. And I'm in like judgment of what the person is saying. I'm like, no, that's not it. Okay. Alternatively, you might look at life history strategies, and I suspect that you don't know what this is. But life history is a theory that's used to describe differences between organisms. So, for instance, frogs have a fast life history strategy, but elephants have a slow life history strategy. Frogs reproduce very quickly, they reproduce in very large numbers, and lots of frogs die. They mature very quickly as well. But elephants do the opposite. They mature very slowly, they engage in mutualistic familial relationships, they have very few offspring, and they die much less often than frogs. Lots of frogs. So frogs, lots of frogs, and some will survive. And in elephants, one baby, and it's protected. It's taken care of, right? It's nurtured. So that's life history strategy, but it's similarly applied to the Dark Triad, because I've argued that the Dark Triad traits, which are psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism, are indicators to some degree of fast life history strategies. So whether you have a dispositional tendency to be fast, like to take risks, to engage in aggressive behavior, selfish behavior, these are correlated with the Dark Triad. So they all kind of go together. So we would then expect people who were faster, as in high in the Dark Triad, or also interested in mating as opposed to parenting effort in their life, they should be more intrasexually competitive. And again, it should be moderated by sex and region again. And this would be these people, you could say, instead of trying to be protecting what they have, instead they're hungry, right? They want to take from the world. These are takers. And so they are dispositionally oriented towards competition in general. Whatever it is, they want to protect what they have. They want to take what you have. They're just raw, kind of. And this is me eating this way. Okay, anyways, let's go to the study. So we had quite a few people. The original data was something like over 4,000, but you have to clean, of course, any of these projects. When you have college students and volunteers, you clean a lot. So we're down to 3,700 heterosexuals. We have removed also everyone who was not who didn't say they were heterosexual, because we have the question of men competing with women, men competing with men. And so if you're a straight man, then it's clear. But if you're a gay man, it's unclear if it's about mating or it's about competition. Yeah. And so we removed in line with other research, of course, 397 non-heterosexuals, a rather standard sample, only 25 years old. But we tried to get the data was collected around the world, and so it was undergraduates, probably graduate students and community members, whatever we could get. This was what I call guerrilla sampling, like whatever you could do to get this sample. I don't mean gorilla like this kind of gorilla. I mean gorilla like Che Guevara gorilla. We classify data in terms of weird and non-weird, and this is it's like something you struggle with. And we've had problems with this paper at journals because they've responded with, why didn't you run, hierarchical linear modeling and account for within and between, because you don't have enough numbers in each country. So we had to find a way to deal with this reasonably. And some of the journals just aren't willing to hear this argument. They're like, no, like we only have 42 people from the Netherlands. What do you want me to do? Like we have hundreds of people from Canada, but they're just, they're fixated on this. This was part of a larger project, as I mentioned. We already published one paper in it in 2020, and this paper was published without all those other authors. So they didn't know this paper existed until I tried to publish this intrasexual competition one, and by fluke, one of the people who is now an author was asked to be a reviewer. And she was like, hey, wait, I collected this data. Kurva. And I'm sure I said that in English, but yeah, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, we kept asking you and sending you emails for like years, and you didn't want to be involved. And now when the project is done, now you want to be involved. It's like very parasitic. I really don't like it. Anyways, so huge amounts of other things. We have social desirability scale, cross-cultural data, evolutionary content. So we already have another paper under review, which I actually forgot about mate value, about trying to understand this concept of mate value, of how valuable do I see myself as a potential romantic partner. So we put forth a kind of very brief measure, an alternative measure, and we'll see what happens. Anyways, so pretty standard, although a rather large sample given at least the standards in 2013. Now the standards, I think 3,000 is probably it's nothing amazing by modern standards, but nevertheless. So how do we measure things? So we have this life history scale, which is only 8 items. We made sure that the 2-dimensional model was better than a 1-dimensional model using multi-groups confirmatory factor analysis and a variety of other tests to check that things were good. And I'll show you some of that information in a second. Parenting effort and mating effort. The alphas are crap, but I've not actually seen this scale perform well mathematically ever. It's only 4 items per, so maybe it's not so problematic. But if you are someone who has high parenting effort, you agree a lot with the statement, I'm good at taking care of children. But if you're someone who puts in lots of mating effort, you agree with the statement, I want to sleep with a large number of people in my lifetime, for example. So we have slow and fast. I invest in my offspring, I'm on to the next one. To quote the great poet Ariana Grande, next. And we use the Dirty Dozen, my scale, and we'll get to the issues with this in a bit. But we also showed here that the 3-dimensional structure is better than a 1-dimensional structure, which is essentially just a replication that I did a good thing in 2010. And we measure psychopathy with items like I tend to be unconcerned with the morality of my actions. We measure Machiavellianism with items like I have used deceit or lied to get my way, and narcissism, I tend to want others to pay attention to me. And so these are just self-report scales. And that's a lot of this project is just one massive self-report data collection process. And as I said, we've already have 3 papers written. I think we'll squeeze out maybe one more, and then that'll be the end of it, and we'll move on with our life. But we'll need to have all 20,000 other co-authors on this last paper. Okay, so these are the actual items for the intrasexual competition scale, but also the factor analysis as well. And so the Alberts solution relied on principal access factoring. So we started with that because we figured, let's see if we can replicate what they found. And we had to do so many corrections, so many removing of items. It just didn't work out. And so I said, okay, you know what? Let's try a principal components analysis. Right? I'm just going to try it. They're not. There's some disagreement about which is the proper approach to use here, but without any effort, this is what the principal components analysis. No trimming. This is all the items on the scale. They just fall into a 3-dimensional structure without any extra work, without any corrections, without anything. So we have at the top an item like, I can't stand it when I meet another man or woman which is based on what your sex is, who is more attractive than I am. I think this sounds like envy. And so our first component we decided will be called envy. The second component was the jealousy component. I just don't like very ambitious men, for example. So I would say that. So if someone's like trying to show off, look at me, I'm great, trying to earn their status, I don't like that person. Stay down. What is this saying in English? Stay in your lane, right? Stay in your lane. And so we think this might be intrasexual jealousy. And I think it might be because this is the only study that's ever shown this factor structure. So we need to, of course, replicate it, and et cetera, right? And then the bottom one, the superiority, seems to be something like, I like to be funnier and more quick-witted than other men. For example, I'm better, I'm superior to you. I always want to beat others, right? I want to be number one. Hashtag number one. Okay, and this, I mean, you couldn't write a textbook for this factor solution. I mean, I'm going to teach a psychometrics class, and I'm going to make the students run this because, as we all have learned, the typical threshold for eigen for treating a factor is a 1. So the third factor is right there, like it just made it. So I will teach a class starting in March, I think March, something like that, and I'll make the students I'll give them this data and say, okay, this is your assignment. You're going to run a factor analysis on this data, and I'm not going to tell them I've already published the data. Don't show this to any one of my students. But anyways, so the alphas are reasonable for 4 items per scale. I'm happy with this solution. The 3-dimensional structure fits the data better than the original structure, which was 1-dimensional. So the scale was created by a guy named Abram Brunk and Marianne Fisher, and interestingly, Marianne Fisher is not only an author on this paper, but she's an author on the 2-dimensional paper as well. And she, I guess, doesn't really have a particularly strong opinion about these things. She's just, well, it's my scale, so I'll be on the paper or something like that. So it fits better than the 3-dimensional, the 1-dimensional, but also better than the Albert's solution, than the new solution. It's not as better than the 1-dimensional, but it's definitely still better than the 1-dimensional. Now, problem though, the things don't seem to work out as well when we get to the actual fit indices. Okay, so at the top, let's just get through. We also verified factor structures for the other scales because we have a cross-cultural sample, and this seems to be almost a requirement for a lot of journals now. I think it's inappropriate. I think it's an assumption test, and where it's like it would be like publishing in your paper that you cleaned the data and that you did, we checked for normality. That's for theses, right? For us, we do that in the background. It's expected of us, but now it's become almost standard practice to report this kind of stuff. So my scale works great, right? So the CFI 0.96, 3 factors, great, better. Okay, of course, because okay. Speaking of intrasexual competition, the Kruger measure, the 2-factor is better, but it's still we know that these are recommendations of, it's clear that that 2 is better than 1. So we're going to go with the best thing. And this is one of the things I notice about a lot of junior colleagues. They get caught up in, well, I haven't satisfied this, so I must now stop. No, you have to go forward. Our results are qualified by this limitation as opposed to anything else. Similarly with the intrasexual competition scale. Now, here's a little bit of gossip for you. The person who created the life history strategy scale and the second author from the intrasexual competition scale, both having factor loadings of CFIs, they used the date. And so maybe there's some sort of they were bad at psychometrics and that's why they dated. I don't know what's going on, but yeah, they don't date anymore. I'll tell you that. This is intersexual competition now. And lastly, we tried to also look at our solution at the bottom. Sorry for the screwed up boxes here. And even our 3-factor solution was still not so great. If we did some modifications, right, if we allowed error terms to correlate, we get it over 0.91. So it might be that this intrasexual competition scale is not so good, and maybe we need to make new items or something like that. But this is what we have, and we have to deal with this, and so we have to go forward. So all we can say is it's the best option. So given that the three-factor structure is the best here, we think it's at least empirically reasonable to go forward with that solution. We can't go forward with the modified one because you can't include cross-loadings in your, unless we ran structural equation modeling, which we're too lazy to do. Now, again, things are okay in the measurement invariance. Again, we're verifying, and of course, no surprise, Dark Triad, right? It works just fine, right? It has measurement invariance and great, wonderful stuff, metric, scalar, everything. The life history strategy scale, again, it's okay. It seems to do okay in the metric level, right? So it allows you to make comparisons at the mean level, but scalar variance, it's not so good. Now, it's not horrible. It's just not past these thresholds that we tend to use. And it's the exact same thing with the intrasexual competition scale. That three-factor structure is, when we compare in men and women or in weird or non-weird data, it's better in the metric level than in the scalar level for invariance. I'm not sure why that is. I've even tried to look at how we can understand fit indices as data itself, and we haven't been able, not in this study, but in another study. So we published some data on on my scale, and we had fit indices by country. I was like, well, can we account for country level fit indices? But there's so little range that we just can't find anything. Like maybe there are country predictors that account for why the fit is better in Norway than it is in Sweden or something like that. Now, we tried and failed, but I think there's still something worth doing in this if in the future, is what accounts for the differences in fit. I don't think anyone really studies it. It's just, we just take it for granted. Well, why, not psychometrically, but why psychologically do maybe people respond differently? So maybe it's not something about the item wording or any of that. It's that psychologically there may be factors in people's lives or people's countries that might be accounting for that. So just as a small example, many years ago, I think maybe even before I knew you, I went to Moscow, which is like ages. I went to Moscow and they were translating the Dirty Dozen, and they couldn't get a three-factor solution to work. They only would get one every time, one. And I'm there, and it was very labored. So their English is very bad. This was a very hard conversation, but they couldn't look past the idea that this was like a mathematical problem, like a psychometric problem. And I was like, wait, maybe there's something about Russians, right? Could it be that Russians, they don't internally differentiate between these, and they wouldn't even consider this hypothesis. Somehow they found a way to get three factors later, but they were not willing to consider the possibility even that it might be just a dispositional thing about Russians that line them up. And there's evidence for example, in less advanced societies that you don't get the five-factor solution. It all just loads together as one thing. The differentiation of traits seems to be a relatively modern phenomena, not the default of people. So we moving on. Sorry. We have a wonderful three-way interaction, which I will try to break down for you in a second. So this is the larger set of the data, of course. So the interaction was about the three types of intrasexual competition. So this would be the within subject factor, and then we have two between subject factors of men and women and weird and non-weird data. So don't get caught up with this. I'll go on and I'll show you things I want you to see. Okay. So if we look down, right, these would be the within subjects effects in the sexes, right? We find that it's relatively uniform, right? Most people, it's superiority. That's the high one, right? That's the one that people are rating the highest is in men and women, superiority across the board, right? Now the effect sizes change a little bit, but it seems relatively constant. It's superiority first, followed by envy, and then last, jealousy. Going on here are specific sex differences. And those sex differences depend on not just the type of emotion and the sex of the person, but in the location. So we see in weird data, we find significant differences all down the line. And this is important because the prior research suggested that there weren't sex differences, right? In this very scale when they treated it as one thing. Well, what's going on here? You have one negative, envy is negative, and then you have two positives. And so they're just, in the past, they've canceled each other out and given the illusion that there are no sex differences. The differentiation here has allowed us to see, no, there are sex differences in intrasexual competition, in this case, in the emotions associated with it, because we've been able to disentangle these three kinds. And so it seems like slightly, right, men are more intrasexually jealous, but they're a lot more intrasexually superior in their sense. And it's women who are more intrasexually envious. This is in the Western sample, the weird sample. Over here onto the non-weird sample, we only find one effect now, and it's replicating the envy effect. So it's, in this case, we have non-weird women are more intrasexually envious. Okay? But in the Western data, everything is essentially significant. Now, admittedly, the jealousy one is just like over the line, like it's just barely there. And that might be, of course, because we have a young sample, and so they don't have anything. They don't have any reason. I mean, no, we have a sample that goes up to 64, but you know, I had a sample once that was up to 92 because grandma took the survey, right? Like, so anyways, it seems like there are sex differences, but they depend on the type of intrasexual competition and the location of the sample. Again, remember, the non-weird distinction is people are hating it when we send this in. It's clearly revealing stuff, but they're really objecting to this gross kind of breaking up the data in half. The sample sizes are good, but yeah, sometimes stats nerds are they're tough. Now we have two-way interactions as well. And what do we have here? This kind of shows a little bit more what we've already seen, is that we have nothing going on in the jealousy. We have envy as a sex difference for women, and we have the superiority effect for men. So this is regardless of being Western or weird or non-weird, this sex difference plays out in the data. These sex differences, I'm sorry. And we have, I mean, kind of unexpectedly, as in we don't have good reason to make these predictions. I had once tried to make, in an earlier version of this paper, I had tried to make an argument for these effects having to do with access to resources and status and kind of calibration. So people with poorer people, so non-weird people, may have less status, and so but the co-authors didn't like it. They're like, this is racist. I'm like, racist? What is anything about race? It's weird, non-weird. Fine, I don't need the drama in my life. So weird people seem to be more envious than non-weird people. Oh, this is a weird one. Okay, but maybe having stuff makes you want more stuff.
Yeah.
For example, this is my conjecture, right? Jealousy, on the other hand, it's almost like the flip side of this. Not having stuff makes you more protective of the very few things you have. Okay, but this is what was apparently racist. Okay. And the superiority, again, as you see, superiority is the dominant one here, but it's nothing. It's just bam, it's the same. Okay. Of course, let's be honest. These are. If you ignore the effect sizes, you get, rather significant effects. But I hate when people say a rather significant effect. It's either significant or it's not. Right? It's either rare or it's not. These are small effects, though, right? So they're not impressive. They're not, 0.02. Okay. But of course, we are in a field that accounts for very little variance as a rule. And so if we have good reason to predict this, if we couch this in, look, we're showing something that's never been shown before. We'll see what happens when we do more of this. So I hope I can get this published this year, because I have every year I get to have students in Australia, and I'm going to try to get them to follow up on this, and maybe it'll be good things. Maybe it'll show good things. We can have a replication. Anyways, of course there's some main effects operating here. And at first I thought that this face might be envy, but now I think it's lust. But that's definitely the woman in the blue shirt. That's definitely jealousy. How dare you? Dare you? And I'm sure people know about the red dress effect, right? So he couldn't help it. It was the red dress. Okay. Although there's definitely some question about this French researcher's stuff. So some main effects, and these are huge, as you can see, like partially to squared at 0.5. Right, and it was just, as we discussed, it's superiority is first, jealousy is second, and envy is last. But we didn't globally, when you, going back to the problems with the sex differences, when you ignore the distinction between the three kinds, you simply can't find sex differences. There's no global sex difference. There's no global regional effect. It's all at the interaction level. Okay.
Thank you.
Don't cry. I know. This is one of those things. I hate when people do this. Although putting this up the other day when I was creating this, I found an error in this, and I was like, damn it, I hate that. So I'll show you the error just so you can, an error you cannot make. You can't have points. Can't have this. This is less than 0.01. That's just an error in the creation. So it's not going to get rejected for that, right? But it's my pedantic, like, no, we've got to do it right. Okay. So, but I will summarize it for you because this is a ridiculous. But I just want to show you this to show you how much work I did. Now, of course, I had a student do it. I didn't do it myself. Who doesn't work anymore? Okay. So we have age effects. Okay. Intrasexual envy was, this is the correlations, right? Intrasexual envy was less common in people aged? What kind of English is that? In old people. Wow, I can't even believe I wrote that. I must have been doing something else. This was stronger in women and in non-weird participants. So in principle, people who don't have. Okay, again, racist. Okay. Sexual jealousy was more likely in older people and in men. No one says, oh, you're so misandrist or something here. And lastly, intrasexual superiority was stronger in younger people and non-weird women. So I'm not sure exactly about the non-weird women part, but younger people are in that competitive space. They lack anything. I'm clawing my way up. When I was, when I was new in this game, I worked constantly. I was like, I gotta claw. I'm gonna publish. I'm working. I lost relationships over my ambitions because I was like, I must be the number one. That kind of thing. I even thought that, but like in my soul, that's what made me, I had to do that. Now, there are some life history effects. I'll get to this issue in a minute, never mind. All three forms of intrasexual competition were associated with less parenting effort. They were not, people who care about kids are not engaging in intrasexual competition, the chest beating and all that, that's not what they're doing. This effect is absent, though, in non-weird participants, and it is stronger in weird women than weird men. Okay. Coordinating effort, no surprise, it's the flip side, right? It's associated with more intersexual competition. Now, I don't like this effect because I'm trying to argue unsuccessfully that life history strategy is not a single dimension, but is actually two dimensions. And this suggests that, no, it's just two poles, right? So that doesn't make me happy, but can't win them all. This was stronger in non-weird men for envy and superiority only. And now lastly, Dark Triad stuff. Again, like with the mating effort, all the Dark Triad traits were associated with more intrasexual competition, whether it's envy, superiority. These are people geared towards conflict. That is what this, I think these dispositions set people up. As Lydia knows, I have a paper under review now that suggests that these people are shorter and have more height dissatisfaction as well. They're engaging in psychological processes to make them seem more competitive, more intimidating, that kind of thing, because they don't have the physicality to be so. Okay, and the effect was in men and women, so it's not even a kind of Napoleon complex, which of course that's what the title is. But it was in narcissism. It was stronger in women and in non-weird participants for the intrasexual envy component. For psychopathy, it was strongest in non-weird men for intrasexual jealousy, and for weird women for intrasexual superiority. And lastly, in Machiavellianism, it was most strongly linked to intrasexual envy, right? So Machiavellianism is in some ways a social strategy about maneuvering and getting power. And so lacking power, as in having you lack power, so you engage in psychological processes and emotions, the envy, you feel envious, and competing for other things, intersexual superiority, more than, for instance, being a nice person, for example. Okay, so to wrap up, because I think I've already I'm almost over time. Sorry, everybody. Emotions are I'm throwing a bone here to Lydia here, of course. Emotions, like the Force, bind all species together, because she likes Star Wars. It's a, yeah, okay. Most, if not all species, social species in particular, social species is what's key here, compete with one another for scarce resources. Food is limited. It doesn't seem that way to modern Western people, because food is everywhere, right? You go to, I mean, there's a żabka like every 50 meters. I mean, where I live in Warsaw, in Wola, like we live in this complex. There's three. Like you just go left and there's one, and you go right, there's another, and then you go back. It's just too many żabka, I think. Too many. I don't know how they make any money. Only one owner. That's what it is. It's a saturating with żabka. So the need to compete for status, for territory, for resources, for mates, for food, the list goes on. And these adaptive challenges shape our emotional systems, shape wolves, dogs' emotional systems, of course, as well. And those who had the correct systems were better able to compete, and therefore these become kind of characteristic traits of the species. And so we proposed and validated, I hope, 3 potential emotions, right? And these that are about protecting what you have, wanting what others have, and gearing you up to compete, right? As in, I'm superior, I deserve this. We also showed that these patterns are tracked by perceived access to resources. So narcissists think that they're owed more, for example. So whether they are or not, whether they is another, they believe it. So this is the perceptual side, but also in terms of traditional access to resources. So narcissists think that they are, deserve to be rich and successful, but people from Western societies are traditionally richer than people from non-Western societies, and men, of course, especially weird white men. Okay, so what I then suggest to you is that past failures to find sex differences might have just been obscured with this scale by the lack of factor analytics. I've had no offense to Marianne Fisher here. She's not a psychometrician. So they created this scale, and it just seems to be just worked out that 3 dimensions was the number. But I don't think they even consider the possibility, which is not wrong, because if you have no reason to predict, you should start with the conservative option, which is it's one thing. But I was bored, and I said, let's just give it a shot, and we'll see what happens. And so we're revealing some new stuff by sometimes just poking around a little bit, and more work clearly is needed for this, because we were just poking around. There was more jealousy in non-weird samples, but more envy in weird samples. To go back to the point we made earlier about when you don't have, you're protective of what you have, and when you have, you want more of what everybody else has, right? Like when I see the suit joke, right? I have suits, I have lots of suits, but I see this person in a suit, like we saw someone today walking with an entire outfit from Poshevka. And I was like, this guy, I'm gonna like, right? Because we went yesterday. I'm pointing to Lydia. We went yesterday and we couldn't find anything. It was very disappointing. Okay, and there's something about life history speed that seems to track intersexual competitiveness, but being slow seems to orient people away from it. Being fast seems to orient people to it. But I want to take a second, and maybe the stuff that I'd like to go into this next with my students is, it seems like it might have implications for political conflicts as well. That the desire to keep your status, desire to keep immigrants out, these kinds of things might actually be behind racism, might be intrasexual competition. It might be men saying, those men are taking my jobs. They're competing over this. So I'd like to see if we can look at how these 3 dimensions of intersexual competition might predict things like racism, left to right kind of political things, and of course sexism as well. And so if I'm a man and I perceive women usurping my ability to have the jobs that I want because I'm intersexually, because I have these intersexual systems already, that I might engage in more sexism because how dare she's trying to take my job. Because I think then when you get to, even though this person is a woman, you're now on the competition is not about men and women now. We're now competing as just people. And so now we're equal. Okay, now we're competing. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to make some headway in looking at racism and sexism from this intrasexual competition framework. And I don't think it violates the things we already know about, like, for example, realistic conflict theory in terms of racism research, right? The idea that you're racist towards groups that you evaluate as genuinely in conflict with your access to resources. Okay? So to use Polish people as an example, there is racism in England, as everybody knows, towards Polish people because the poor working class carpenters or whatever in Europe, in England, feel that their jobs are being taken by the Polish immigrants who are also doing those jobs. And so you have this kind of conflict. And it's mostly men who are conflicting here. So, okay, so obviously some limitations. Sorry, I'm going so long. It's the first time I've ever given this talk, so I'm just going. We have obviously student, volunteer, online, and Western samples. We have this weird versus non-weird distinction that I've already mentioned that people have some problems with, but I think it's an ad hoc solution. It's just what we had to do to deal with it. And because I can imagine as an editor of journals, if you came to me with data that had from all these different countries, I would say, well, what about, like, do something with the cross-cultural element, something with this. Don't just ignore it. It's nice that you have big data, but squeeze a little more out of this if you can. Lots of criticisms about my scale. It's considered to be too short for a lot of people. It excludes content because it's only 12 items. You can't reduce it to lower order aspects of each trait. So you can't look at, say, let's call it like fearless dominance aspects of psychopathy. But this was a large cross-cultural project that people had to translate things, that we wanted to collect a lot of data. And so this was like a fatigue, both on the case of the researchers, but also fatigue in the case of the participants' way of avoiding it. That's point one. Point two is this study was created and run before the newer versions of the Dark Triad measures had even come out. So if you think that the short Dark Triad, for instance, is better, which of course people don't think it's better, but let's just assume it is because it's longer. They were still trying to publish that paper in 2013. So that, to me, again, as an editor, is not a reason to reject the paper. Okay. Anyways, I'm biased because it's my paper. Of course, as I mentioned, this issue of broadband tests, but this is not just with the Dark Triad, this is for all of the scales. We have a limited kind of lower order aspects of all the traits that we measured. That these three dimensions are new and we need more validation. And there is some doubt among the anthropologists and biologists about this psychometric approach to life history theory, as in you can extract someone's life history strategy through self-report measures. What they would say, for instance, they would take the contextual argument and say, well, you need to manipulate conditions. You need to make people feel that they're under threat or measure whether they're under threat. And I'd say, well, the non-weird distinction is kind of getting at that, but we don't have that. This was a personality study, not a social psychology study. Okay. So I will whiz through these things because I'm way over time. There may be at least three emotions that underlie intersexual competition. There are clearly some sex differences that also depend on the regions that we ask people in, but the sex differences are consistent, at least when they replicate. And it seems like those who feel and those who have more status want to protect it, but those who don't want that status, and they have attitudes or emotions that try to bring them up to the power. Okay, thanks everybody.